There's a moment when you realize that everything you've been taught about power is backwards. They told you to be nice. They told you to compromise. They told you that strength meant helping others feel comfortable with your success. But here's what they never told you. The moment you stop needing anything from anyone, you become absolutely terrifying to them. Most people live their entire lives as emotional hostages. Someone raises their voice, and their heart rate spikes. Someone withdraws affection, and they scramble to please. Someone questions their worth, and they immediately begin defending themselves. But what if I told you there's a different way to exist? What if emotional invulnerability isn't just possible, but inevitable once you understand the mechanics of true power? The ancient masters knew something we've forgotten. Power isn't about controlling others, it's about becoming uncontrollable yourself. When you achieve complete dominion over your internal responses, when you become the unmoved mover in every interaction, something profound shifts in the fabric of reality around you. People sense it immediately. They can't name it, but they feel the presence of someone who has stepped outside the game entirely. This isn't about becoming cold or disconnected. This is about becoming so internally sovereign that external chaos becomes irrelevant. Imagine standing in the center of a hurricane and feeling nothing but curiosity about the wind patterns. That's the state we're building toward, not numbness, but perfect clarity in the midst of everyone else's emotional storms. The transformation begins with a simple recognition. Every emotional reaction you have is a choice. Not a conscious choice, perhaps, but a programmed response that can be reprogrammed. When someone insults you and you feel anger rising, that's not inevitable. That's conditioning. When someone threatens your position and anxiety floods your system, that's not natural. That's learned helplessness masquerading as normal human behavior. But here's where it gets dangerous. Once you start seeing emotional reactions as choices, you begin to see something else. How desperately everyone around you needs you to remain reactive. Your anger validates their power over you. Your anxiety confirms their importance. Your defensive responses feed their sense of control. The entire social ecosystem depends on everyone remaining emotionally predictable. The moment you step outside this system, you break something fundamental in how people relate to you. They lose their leverage. Their usual tactics stop working. Their emotional manipulations bounce off you like rain off stone. And this terrifies them more than any aggression ever could. Let me show you exactly how this works in practice. You're in a meeting, and a colleague publicly challenges your competence. The room goes quiet. Everyone expects the familiar dance: defense, counterattack, escalation. Instead, you pause for 3 seconds, not because you're calculating a response, but because their words simply don't penetrate your internal fortress. When you finally speak, your voice carries the weight of someone who has nothing to prove. That's an interesting perspective, you say, and then you wait. No justification, no counter-evidence, no emotional charge whatsoever, just those 5 words and silence. The power dynamic has shifted so completely that everyone in the room feels it. Your challenger suddenly looks foolish, not because you've destroyed them, but because you've revealed that their attack was meaningless to you. This is what Machiavelli understood when he wrote that it's better to be feared than loved. But he was only scratching the surface. It's better still to be incomprehensible. When people can't predict your reactions, they can't manipulate your responses. When they can't manipulate your responses, they lose all power over you. When they lose all power over you, they begin to fear what they cannot control. But let's go deeper. This isn't just about workplace dynamics or social interactions. This is about rewiring the fundamental operating system of your consciousness. Most people live in a constant state of emotional dependency. They need validation, approval, comfort, security, all external supplies for internal deficiencies. But what happens when you become emotionally self-sufficient? What happens when you generate your own validation, your own approval, your own sense of worth? You become dangerous in the most subtle way imaginable, not because you harm others, but because you prove that their entire way of being is optional. Your very existence becomes a threat to their reality tunnel. You walk through life untouchable, and this makes everyone else feel naked. Consider what happens in personal relationships when you embody this principle. Your partner tries to manipulate you through guilt, withdrawal, or emotional outbursts. Instead of the usual pattern where you either capitulate or escalate, you simply observe their behavior with the detached interest of a scientist studying a fascinating species. You don't judge them, you don't punish them, you simply don't participate in their emotional drama. "I can see you're upset," you might say, your voice carrying neither condescension nor concern, just plain acknowledgement. "Let me know when you're ready to have a conversation." Then you go about your business, completely unaffected by their emotional state. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. You're not withdrawn, you're sovereign. The effect is immediate and profound. They realize their emotional manipulations have no purchase on you. They understand that their internal chaos cannot create chaos in you. And something strange happens. They begin to calm down, not because you forced them to, but because emotional escalation requires participation from both parties. When one person refuses to engage with drama, drama cannot sustain itself. But here's where most people make a crucial mistake. They think emotional sovereignty means emotional suppression. They think becoming unshakable means becoming unfeeling. This is exactly backwards. True power comes not from shutting down your emotional apparatus, but from mastering it so completely that you choose when and how to engage it. When you achieve this mastery, something remarkable happens to your presence. People begin to sense that you're operating from a different paradigm entirely. You're not playing the same game they're playing. You're not seeking the same rewards, fearing the same losses, or operating under the same assumptions about what matters. This creates what I call the sovereignty paradox. The less you need from others, the more they want to give you. The less you seek validation, the more people validate you. The less you chase power, the more power gravitates toward you. It's as if the universe rewards those who stop grasping for what they want. Let me give you another concrete example. You're at a social gathering and someone decides to publicly embarrass you. They bring up a past failure, question your judgment, or make a cutting remark designed to diminish your status in front of others. The room watches to see how you'll react. Will you defend yourself? Will you counterattack? Will you withdraw in humiliation? Instead, you do something unexpected. You smile. Not a defensive smile, not a forced smile, but the genuine smile of someone who finds the entire situation amusing. "You know," you say, your voice carrying a note of genuine appreciation. "You're absolutely right about that." And then you elaborate on their point, acknowledge the validity of their criticism, and perhaps even share another example of your own fallibility. The room is stunned. This isn't how the script is supposed to go. The person who attacked you suddenly looks petty and cruel, while you appear secure, wise, and utterly unflappable. You've turned their weapon into your victory without firing a single shot in return. This is the art of emotional aikido, redirecting force instead of opposing it. When someone tries to make you smaller, you make yourself transparent. When someone tries to diminish you, you diminish the importance of what they're trying to diminish. When someone tries to hurt you, you show them that you cannot be hurt by anything they consider important. But understand this clearly. This isn't a technique you can simply apply like a band-aid. This is a fundamental reorientation of your relationship with reality. You cannot fake emotional sovereignty. You cannot pretend to be unaffected while internally seething with reaction. The power comes from genuinely not being moved by external circumstances, and that requires deep internal work. The process begins with radical responsibility. Every emotional reaction you have is your creation, not the fault of external circumstances, not the inevitable result of what others do, but your own internal response pattern playing out. When you fully accept this responsibility, you also claim the power to change it. Start with small irritations. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Notice the surge of anger that automatically arises. Don't judge it, don't suppress it, just observe it. Ask yourself, what would it feel like to be genuinely unaffected by this person's driving? Not fake unaffected, not spiritually bypassed, but truly indifferent to their behavior. Practice this radical indifference systematically. Someone is rude to you at the store. Someone interrupts you in conversation. Someone takes credit for your work. In each case, experiment with the possibility that their behavior is completely irrelevant to your internal state. Not because you're above it all, but because you're so anchored in your own center that external chaos cannot penetrate your core. As you develop this capacity, something profound begins to happen to your presence. People start treating you differently. They speak to you with more respect, not because you've demanded it, but because something in your bearing commands it automatically. They're less likely to test you, less likely to try to manipulate you, less likely to bring their drama to your door. This is where Machiavelli's insight about fear becomes relevant, but in a way he might not have fully understood. You become feared not because you're threatening, but because you're unpredictable. Not unpredictable in your actions, those can be quite consistent, but unpredictable in your reactions. People can't figure out how to get under your skin because you've made your skin impenetrable. But let's talk about what happens when you encounter someone who's trying to systematically destroy your reputation. They're spreading lies about you, undermining your work, turning people against you. The natural response is to defend yourself, to counterattack, to fight fire with fire. But what if there's a more elegant solution? When someone is actively working against you, their power comes from your reaction to their actions. If you respond predictably, with anger, defense, or counterattack, you're giving them exactly what they want, evidence that they can affect you. But what if you responded with something they can't defend against? Complete indifference coupled with consistent excellence. You don't address their attacks. You don't defend against their lies. You don't even acknowledge their existence. Instead, you focus entirely on being so excellent at what you do that their words become obviously irrelevant. You let your work speak so loudly that their whispers are drowned out. This isn't passive aggression. This isn't silent treatment. This is the profound power of making someone irrelevant through your own magnificence. When your excellence is undeniable, their criticism becomes background noise. When your character is unassailable, their character assassinations become obvious projections. But here's what makes this approach truly devastating. It forces them to escalate their attacks to increasingly desperate levels, which makes them look increasingly unhinged while you maintain perfect composure. They're fighting someone who isn't fighting back, which makes them look like they're shadow boxing. They're trying to diminish someone who's too busy creating value to notice their efforts. The psychological effect on your attacker is profound. They realize they cannot move you, they cannot affect you, they cannot make you smaller, angrier, or less than you are. This revelation often breaks something in their approach entirely. They may continue their attacks, but the energy goes out of them when they realize they're hitting a target that doesn't register impact. Now let's explore what happens in intimate relationships when you embody this principle. Your partner says something designed to trigger your insecurity, perhaps bringing up an ex or criticizing something they know you're sensitive about. The old you would have taken the bait, getting defensive, feeling hurt or attacking back. But the sovereign you recognizes this as simply information about their internal state, not a statement about your worth. I hear that you're feeling some kind of way, you might respond, your voice carrying neither warmth nor coldness, just clarity. I'm going to give you some space to work through whatever that is. And then you disengage. not in anger, not in punishment, but in simple recognition that they're not in a state to have a productive interaction. This response does something remarkable. It makes their manipulation attempt completely ineffective while also offering them dignity. You're not punishing them for trying to hurt you. You're simply not allowing yourself to be hurt. You're not retaliating. You're just stepping outside the dynamic entirely. The effect on your relationship is transformative. When your partner realizes they cannot manipulate your emotions, cannot push your buttons, cannot make you smaller or more insecure, they're forced to relate to you from a different place entirely. They must engage with your actual self rather than trying to trigger your reactive self. This often creates temporary chaos as they adjust to the new dynamic. They may escalate their attempts to get a rise out of you. They may accuse you of being cold or disconnected. They may even threaten to leave if you don't go back to being reactive. But if you maintain your center through this transition, something beautiful emerges on the other side. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than mutual manipulation. But understand that this path requires absolute commitment to your own development. You cannot be selectively sovereign, reactive to some things but not others, emotionally dependent in some areas but not others. Emotional sovereignty is a complete rewiring of how you interface with reality. It's a fundamental shift from being effect to being cause in your own experience. The practical implications extend far beyond personal relationships. In professional settings, emotional sovereignty translates to unshakable confidence that doesn't require external validation. You don't need credit for your ideas because your sense of worth doesn't depend on recognition. You don't need to prove yourself because you have nothing to prove. You don't need to defend your position because your position is unassailable. Not because it's perfect, but because you're not attached to being right. This creates a strange phenomenon. People begin to trust your judgment more because you're clearly not invested in any particular outcome. When someone has no ego involved in being right, their perspective becomes more valuable. When someone isn't seeking personal advantage, their advice becomes more trustworthy. When someone genuinely doesn't need anything from you, you want to give them everything. Here's a specific scenario to illustrate this principle. You're presenting an idea to a group of executives. One of them interrupts you mid-sentence and says, "This is exactly the kind of thinking that got us into trouble last quarter. I think we should table this and move on." Everyone in the room tenses, waiting to see how you'll handle this direct challenge to your competence. The reactive response would be to defend your idea, perhaps pointing out flaws in their reasoning or providing evidence for why your approach is sound. But the sovereign response is different. You pause for a moment, genuinely considering their perspective. Then you say, "You raise an important concern. Help me understand what specific aspect of this approach feels risky to you." Notice what you've done. You haven't defended, you haven't attacked, you haven't withdrawn. You've invited dialogue. You've demonstrated that you're more interested in finding the best solution than in being right. You've shown that their criticism doesn't threaten you because your worth isn't tied to your ideas being accepted. This response immediately shifts the dynamic. Your challenger realizes they're not dealing with someone whose ego is invested in the outcome. They're dealing with someone who genuinely wants to understand their perspective. This forces them to articulate their concerns more thoughtfully, which often reveals that their objection is less substantive than their initial emotional reaction suggested. But let's go even deeper into the psychological mechanics of what's happening here. When you respond to challenges without defensiveness, you're demonstrating a quality that most people rarely encounter: genuine security. Not the fake confidence that comes from needing to appear strong, but the quiet certainty that comes from knowing your worth is not up for debate. This quality is so rare that it immediately sets you apart. In a world full of people who are constantly seeking validation, constantly defending their positions, constantly trying to prove their worth, you become an oasis of stability. People are drawn to you not because you're trying to attract them, but because you're not trying to attract them. Your lack of neediness becomes magnetic. This is where the ancient principles of Stoicism meet the modern realities of power dynamics. The Stoic philosophers understood that freedom comes from wanting what you have, not having what you want. When you genuinely want nothing from external circumstances, not approval, not validation, not even favorable outcomes, you become free in a way that others can sense but rarely understand. But freedom without purpose becomes mere indifference. The true power of emotional sovereignty emerges when you combine it with clear vision and consistent action. You're not indifferent to outcomes because you don't care about anything. You're indifferent to outcomes because you're so committed to your process that results become secondary. This creates what I call the sovereign paradox. The less you need success, the more likely you are to achieve it. When you're not attached to winning, you can play the game with perfect clarity. When you're not afraid of losing, you can take risks that others won't take. When you're not invested in being right, you can learn from every interaction. Let me share another practical example. You're in a romantic relationship, and your partner accuses you of not caring about them because you haven't been sufficiently reactive to their emotional states. They say something like, "You're so cold and distant. I feel like I'm in a relationship with a robot. Don't you even care that I'm upset?" The old you might have either gotten defensive, "Of course I care," or apologetic, "I'm sorry, I'll try to be more supportive." But the sovereign you recognizes this as a fundamental misunderstanding of what caring actually means. True caring doesn't require emotional reactivity. In fact, emotional reactivity often gets in the way of genuine care. Your response might be, "I care about you deeply, which is exactly why I don't participate in emotional chaos. When you're ready to tell me what you actually need, I'm here to listen." This response draws a clear boundary while also demonstrating genuine care. You're not being reactive to their emotional state, but you're also not being dismissive of their experience. This often creates temporary frustration because you're not giving them the emotional drama they've come to expect. But over time, it creates profound respect. They begin to understand that your stability is actually a gift to the relationship. Your refusal to be pulled into emotional chaos creates space for genuine intimacy to emerge. The deeper principle here is that emotional sovereignty allows you to love without attachment. You can care deeply about someone without needing them to behave in particular ways to maintain your emotional equilibrium. You can be fully present with someone without making their emotional state responsible for your own. This is perhaps the greatest gift you can give to any relationship, the gift of loving without conditions. But let's explore what happens when you encounter organized resistance to your sovereignty. Sometimes people will coordinate their efforts to break your composure. They'll tag team you in social situations, constantly testing your boundaries, constantly trying to find the button that will make you reactive. This is where your sovereignty becomes truly tested. It's one thing to maintain composure with an individual challenger. It's another thing entirely to remain centered when facing systematic pressure from multiple sources. But here's what most people don't understand. Group manipulation depends entirely on your participation. If you refuse to play the game cannot continue. When faced with coordinated pressure, your response is the same as with individual challenges, but amplified. You become even more still, even more centered, even more unaffected. You don't fight the group. You make yourself transparent to their efforts. Their attacks pass through you without finding purchase. Their manipulations bounce off your centered presence without effect. The psychological impact on the group is profound. They realize they're trying to move someone who cannot be moved. Their usual tactics aren't working. Their emotional weapons are useless against someone who doesn't carry emotional vulnerabilities. This often causes the group dynamic to collapse as individuals begin to question their participation in what's obviously becoming a futile effort. But the real power of emotional sovereignty isn't in these dramatic confrontations. It's in the subtle, daily interactions where most people give away their power without even realizing it. Every time you seek approval, you hand someone else control over your emotional state. Every time you defend yourself against criticism, you validate the critic's importance. Every time you react to someone's emotional manipulation, you teach them that their tactics work. When you achieve true emotional sovereignty, these small power leaks stop happening. You stop giving people reasons to think they can control you. You stop providing evidence that their opinions matter more than your own. You stop reinforcing the idea that external circumstances determine your internal experience. This creates a profound shift in how others relate to you. They begin to treat you with the respect that sovereign beings command naturally, not because you've demanded respect, but because your very presence communicates that disrespect is simply irrelevant to you, not because you're superior to others, but because you're not participating in the comparison game at all. The transformation this creates in your professional life is particularly striking. Colleagues stop bringing their drama to you because they sense you won't participate in it. Superiors begin consulting you more frequently because they trust your judgment isn't clouded by personal agenda. Subordinates respect your leadership because they sense your decisions aren't based on ego or insecurity. But perhaps most importantly, your emotional sovereignty becomes a teaching tool for others. Without saying a word about it, you demonstrate that another way of being is possible. Your very existence becomes proof that people don't have to be emotional hostages to their circumstances. Your presence shows others that inner peace and outer power can coexist. This is the ultimate expression of what Machiavelli called virtù, not virtue in the moral sense, but excellence in the art of living. When you master your internal responses, you master your external circumstances. When you become unshakable within, you become unstoppable without. When you rule your inner world completely, you discover that the outer world begins to reorganize itself around your centered presence. The legacy you leave isn't just your accomplishments or your wealth or your reputation. The legacy you leave is the example of what human beings can become when they stop being reactive and start being responsive. When they stop being effect and start being cause. When they stop being controlled and start being sovereign. And here's the final paradox. The moment you no longer need this power, you have it completely. The moment you stop seeking emotional sovereignty, you embody it fully. The moment you cease trying to be unshakable, you become unmovable. Because true power, real power, ultimate power, is the power to not need power at all. And that power, once claimed, can never be taken from you again. Because it was never outside you to begin with, it was always who you are. You just had to remember.